You're listening to Discography Discussion, episode 259, Crimson Thorn. Hosted by Dan Terry.
Guys, I'm sorry, you can't make me pick between Limp Bizkit and Circleback.
And Joseph Wren. Don't think keyboards like Death Clock. Think keyboards like The Doors. Presented by discussmetal.com. And if you wonder why the thorns are red when the blood runs black, then you are ready for this episode of Discography Discussion. I am Joe. That is Dan. Crimson Thorn. Don't grab those roses, guys. It's still going to make you bleed.
Is it going to make you bleed until your blood runs black?
That's what happens after it coagulates.
That's right. We learned that last week, didn't we? That was whenever I was starting to be on vacation. I'm still on vacation. I'm probably, eating Mickey Mouse shaped waffles right now.
He's going to come back, guys. I promise. Like today. Like I know what you're thinking, but it's not today when you guys recorded this. You're right. But when you're listening to it, that's today. He's probably on his way back right now.
Yeah, at this point in the day right now, I'm probably in the car, not listening to whatever band we have to talk about as soon as I get back.
Crimson Thorn. Blast from the past. It's doomy. It's dirgy. It's death metal. It has real drums.
It has real drums, Joe. You should be very excited about this.
I am the most excited.
I've seen the drums live. They are, in fact, real. Real drum set from Crimson Thorn. These guys are interesting to me because they are one of the most recommended bands in Christian metal forums. Let me tell you something about Christian metal forums for a minute. Or Christian metal Facebook groups, as they're called now. They used to just be forums. You'd get a free, like a Pro Boards free domain name, and you'd set up your Christian metal forum, and then people would come and talk about the Jesus metal with you. Well, that still exists, and people are always jumping on those boards. And the most common types of posts you see on a Christian metal board is, hey guys, I'm really into name a band that's popular in the mainstream. Can you guys recommend me any bands that sound like this except have Christian lyrics? At my age, that's pretty much equivalent to rubbing sandpaper on my scrotum. Just go listen to some bands. If you like some, it's great. Where am I going with this? Where I'm going is that 9 out of 10 times, it does not matter what band you mention. If you say, I'm a huge fan of Nickelback, you're going to get 3 responses. You should check out Demon Hunter, which isn't necessarily that far off base. You'll get Striper, which is way off base. Still awesome, but way off base. Or you're going to get Horde, because the person responding to you is a troll, and they think that the only type of music that you can listen to is that raw, unblack metal.
Who's this Cries from My Past guy?
I used to be that guy. It didn't matter what band you said, I would always respond with Horde. But, another band that gets mentioned, especially if somebody's like, hey guys, I'm really into bands like Carcass and Cannibal Corpse. What are your guys' recommendations? It's going to be a 50-50 split. People are going to say Mortification, Scrolls of the Megaloth. Good rec. But they're also going to say anything by Crimson Thorn. And they may even go into a diatribe about how Crimson Thorn is the heaviest Christian death metal band to ever exist. And honestly, that's factually incorrect for this year, but at the time that this band was putting out records, it may have been true.
Look back on 1995, 1997. I've made all these references before. Napalm Death, Cannibal Corpse. There was an entire genre of heavy music with thrash influences. It's death metal, guys. And this is one of those examples where you can't understand a damn thing he's saying. But because the rest of the band is so unapologetically heavy, it becomes part of the enjoyment to just listen to the growling throat noises. Barney from Napalm Death, this is not, but major influence? Absolutely.
I don't know about that. Maybe. I don't know. The biggest influence I hear vocally in Crimson Thorn is Suffocation. These guys listen to Effigy of the Forgotten. They just did. and I listen to it also, and I also listen to Crimson Thorn. So that's kind of meta. I think these guys really liked some Suffocation, or more accurately, their main guitarist / frontman Luke Reno. He definitely dug him some Suffocation, and I think that is where most of the vocal influence comes from. Could be wrong about that, but if it wasn't Suffocation, it was somebody else that listened to Suffocation that he listened to. So I mean, it's there. Anyway, I'm gonna get off this. I always like to take an opportunity to talk more about Suffocation.
Well, before Dan schedules an impromptu revisit, I'm going to take this time to say thank you to everyone for listening to the podcast. Thank you for listening and for subscribing. If you are not a subscriber, then you can find everything Discography Discussion at discussmetal.com. We are on Spotify, Apple and Google Podcasts, TuneIn Radio, Stitcher, iHeartRadio. So if you have an Amazon Echo or a Google Home, you have no excuse. Ask it to play the latest episode of the Discography Discussion podcast, and it will. We're also on Facebook and on Twitter at Discuss Metal. Be sure to like, favorite, and subscribe. It really helps us out. It lets us know you're listening. And now Dan is going to tell us all about 5-star reviews.
We do enjoy our 5-star reviews here on Discography Discussion. If you want to leave us a review, leave us a review. You can leave us a star rating on Spotify, or you can leave us a written review on Apple Podcasts. It's your choice. I think also if you're on Podcast Addict, which is the podcast app that I use, they actually will allow you to leave a review as well, a written review. So definitely check that out. It makes us feel better. Every now and again, we need a little bit of a pep up. So, keep those happy feelings coming. Speaking of happy feelings, over on Patreon, in reference to episode 255, A Hill to Die Upon, Lost Fiction commented, I was on board as you mentioned Behemoth. Somewhat a contradiction that A Hill to Die Upon are somewhat linked to a satanic band. But yeah, I'd love to hear you talk about Behemoth. It always comes down to that. You know, we start having a conversation and somebody tells me that I need to talk about Behemoth. And you know what I say? Okay, I will. Because I like Behemoth. And I like A Hill to Die Upon. And I like sort of that weird contradiction, as you put it, of a band that came out of the Christian scene spending all their time listening to satanic metal. It's one of my favorite things about that whole scenario. But I definitely hear a lot of Behemoth in A Hill to Die Upon, and I say bring it on.
Speaking of Patreon, do you want to shout out our beloved patrons, Dan?
Let's do it. I mean, we've got quite the list. It's growing every month. I think, as Project 86 put it, and like some sort of fungus, we're growing every day. And our Patreon subscribers are Evan Merkel, Lost Fiction, Kyle Driver, Timu Rayantia,
not bad,
Dangerous Dave, Ryan Rowe, Richard Renz, Big T, Josiah Heiberg, Brandon Miranda, Ken Zapla, Jeremy Prince, Josh Moser, David Brown, Samuel Woodward, Brian the Dean, the Strat Cat, Lance Alligood,
the King of Metal,
Alexander, Patrick Asplund, Jeffrey De Los Santos,
the Actual Mac.
Thank you guys so much for just supporting the show, man. It means so much to me and to Joe and to Jeff, you know, just that you guys care enough to listen to us ramble on week after week about metal, and then to also hear us ramble on even more about even more metal in the unofficial Patreon episodes.
$1 a month gets you into that exclusive album review feed. Check out our perks. We do hangouts once a month.
Once a month, we hang out with a whole lot of the people that are on that list that I just read. They're there and we're there, and we talk, we have fun. We sometimes we play games, we play jackpot games. Sometimes we just sit down and we talk, and we have a good, deep conversation about a variety of different topics. So definitely make sure you're getting in on that if you want to talk. If you want to talk to us otherwise, you know, you can always send us an email. Another reason you might want to email us is if you want to sponsor an episode of the show. We are open to sponsorship. So if you have a band or a company that wants to sponsor an episode of this podcast, hit us up, danandjoeshow@gmail.com. Let us know what you got.
So Dan, tell me about Crimson Thorn.
Well, Joe, Crimson Thorn is an American death metal band And according to the website All Music, they are surely one of the world's most extreme sounding Christian metal bands. I would agree with that, and I think that they sort of came out around the time as a lot of other bands that we like from that scene. They've been around since 1991, starting off as kind of more of a thrash band, and then moving into death metal. Very, very much like Living Sacrifice made that change. As a matter of fact, they were even signed to REX Records at one point, just like Living Sacrifice. But Crimson Thorn has always had kind of a rough go, I think. I think part of it has to do with the fact that they were an evangelical Christian death metal band, which if you call up Steve Rowe from Mortification and ask him how easy it is to do that sort of thing, he'll tell you it's not super, super easy to pull that off. But I got to give him credit for putting out 3 brutal platters of metal for us to talk about tonight. Like, love it or hate it, these guys made quite the strides for Christian death metal, even though I don't necessarily think they get the recognition in comparison to newer bands. What do they sound like? Well, they are like a sort of mid-90s. I don't want to say early 90s because I think it's too heavy to be early 90s. It's not quite like Obituary, but it's like, they've got a very original sound, so it's hard to compare them to another band. But I would say that if you are a fan of bands like Carcass, like early Carcass, or even a little bit of Cannibal Corpse, minus maybe the speed of Cannibal Corpse. But that's kind of what I like about Crimson Thorn, is instead of focusing just on blasting speed, they really let those riffs fly out in front, and they just let them go wherever they naturally should go. And they just create a really, really bone-crunching death metal guitar sound, with the drummer doing the best he can to keep up. And then you've got a vocalist that has, I mean, honestly, some of the deepest vocals I've heard from any band. And they're so proud of their vocals, in fact, that it even says in the liner notes of Unearthed, in case anybody was wondering, it might say it on Dissection too. It says absolutely no vocal effects were used on any of these vocals. This is all him.
If you're listening to Crimson Thorn, you're a fan of that mid-paced, very dry, throat-gurgling death metal sound. You mentioned it earlier. This is one of the bands that gets brought up in the conversation when someone is trying to get into this idea of Christian metal or good Christian metal, because that's most often what I saw. And there's a reason Crimson Thorn is brought up. Because if you're making a specific type of music but giving it a religious tone or an evangelical tone, it does need to sound good, guys. When you had access to your Christian metal forums or your godcore.com and you're downloading samples and lower bitrate MP3s trying to find a good sounding band or an interesting band, Crimson Thorn was always one that sounded normal. If death metal sounds normal in the early 2000s with our 56K modems.
Well, Joe, I think that the band would be very happy to hear you say that, because we'll get into this when we're talking about the individual albums, but like at the very least, the first 2 did not used to sound this good. I think they were recorded well. I think the engineering was solid, but I think whoever mixed it either didn't know how to mix death metal properly, because some of the original releases of these albums that I have that are on like Rex and Atomic and like Little Rose and all that, like I've got 3 versions of Unearthed and I've got 2 versions of Dissection, and they both, well, 3 actually, if you want to count the Vault, the most recent release where they just put them all together as one giant release. But those sounded real bad. They were mixed badly. It was just a mess. I mean, it sounded like mud, which I know is like part of the appeal for some people. If you go on YouTube and search up some of these albums, you might get somebody that uploaded the original, and you'll see what I'm talking about. So if you're gonna listen to Crimson Thorn, you need to definitely buy like the what do they call it? Anthology of Brutality, I believe it's called, because these have all been remixed, remastered, and now they sound great.
1995, Unearthed.
So Unearthed is one hell of a debut for a band like this. I know that they'd had a demo before this called Plagued, so, don't send me an email being like, you guys forgot to talk about all the albums because you didn't talk about Plagued. Plagued's a demo and doesn't really sound like Crimson Thorn as we would know them after they put this record out. So I've listened to Plagued tons of times. They throw all the Plagued tracks usually at the end of the re-releases of this album and of Dissection, so even though I don't have a hard copy of the demo itself, I have collected it more or less through re-releases of these albums. And this is really in-your-face, mid-90s brutal death metal. It may not be, 2022's brutal death metal, but I'll take this any day because of how organic it sounds. They don't sound like they're in $1 million studio, but it's that rawness where the production isn't so bad that it takes away from the actual punch. And what you get is a very organic sounding, ultra deep guttural vocals, bone crunching guitars. The drums are surprisingly audible for a record like this. Even some of the classic death metal albums don't have drums that sound as good as this. There's a really, really nice beefy bass drum sound that I'm a pretty big fan of because for a lot of death metal bands in the mid 90s, all the double bass started sounding really clicky, and these are not clicky. These are deep in your face drums. If there's a word to describe Crimson Thorn, it's deep.
Everybody wanted to be Gene Hoglan at some point. That's where you get the click from with your slamming double bass lines. But Crimson Thorn on this record reminds me of recording demos with the sound guy for your favorite music club who could kind of mix drums. The record sounds very live, and the way the bass drum is kind of shifted to one side of the mix makes me think that they may have recorded or at least scratched these tracks live all in the same room. That on its own is a good reason to listen to this record because it sounds like the band you're going to hear live, but it has that deep, boxy sound. I can only describe it as the same vibe you get on For the Incomplete by Soul Embraced. You said it. It's turned up so loud the production can pull away from the overall experience, but something about it just works. Whoever put this together cared enough about the vibe and cared enough about the music to make sure you could hear everything that's being played. No, the vocals aren't saying anything, but I don't care. I'm listening to throat-shredding growling, and that's what you want when you're listening to this type of death metal.
I'm gonna have to call you out on this one. He's pretty easy to understand compared to a lot of brutal death metal vocals. I can hear him on. I mean, I don't know. I can hear I didn't even have. There aren't even any lyrics included in the anthology of Brutality, and I can still sing along to these songs. Decrepit, I don't know. I can hear every time he's like, "Your weakness makes me laugh." I don't know. There's a lot. There's a lot of stuff. A lot of stuff that you hear, and I can pick words out fine. I'm not gonna throw them into a mashed potato mouth. He's not saying anything. This is not a grindcore release. He's saying every single word that he wrote. I wish that the band was better about publishing their lyrics online. It's a little irritating at times when I want to know some lyrics off of Dissection, because on that record the vocals are a little harder to understand. But I think on this one it's rock solid. I want to know how they recorded the vocals, because they sound a lot different than I'm used to hearing from death metal vocalists from that time. We always kind of have a running joke that these Christian death metal bands always had like way more extreme vocals than a lot of the secular bands did, which is probably not like objectively true, but because I grew up with it, it felt like a cool thing to say if I didn't have anything else to say in my repertoire. But yeah, this isn't heavy on the lead guitar work as much as I'm used to with 90s death metal. There's not as much focus on leads. I mean, you're gonna get a little solo here and there, But you're not going to get a whole lot of lead guitar work. This is a very rhythmically based sort of record, and I think that was an intentional choice. I don't think it's because dude, couldn't play leads. I think it was just more like, yeah, we want to keep this as dark and dingy and deep as possible. And Unearthed is a classic for me. I mean, I've been listening to it half my life, and I like it. As far as how well it stacks up to quote unquote secular death metal, I'm actually going to say it. I think it stands toe to toe in a lot of places. I don't think that there's any type of like lack of familiarity with the style. I think these guys just wanted to sort of get a chapter in the book that Mortification wrote, and they wanted to put out their Christian heavy metal for the world to hear. And I think they did a pretty bang up job on this record. I think the songs and riffs are more memorable on this in comparison to later on in their catalog, where they were focused on heaviness, sure, on this record, but they also crafted the songs to be much more memorable than we're going to get on, say, Dissection when we get to that one.
It's time for that. 1997, Crimson Thorn is still bringing the guttural. They're still bringing the dark. It's not a one-off, guys. It's not an accident that this band gives you this extremely punk-energized death metal. A little bit more leads on this one, but I think the lack of leads works when the goal is to have the crowd be engaged in the pit and in the rhythm and the energy of the song. Almost like Sleeping Giant, how they play these long, drawn-out rhythmic passages to keep you engaged. Now we're listening to more throat-shredding guttural vocals, and that's exactly what you wanted, and now you have a follow-up that might sound a little bit better. It's definitely recorded better. There's more separation in the instruments. The guitars are turned up a little bit on this one. If anything, I liked the drums in the last one better because they sounded so raw and so in the moment. A little bit more production put into this one, a little bit more separation, but it's not a bad record. It's not even a bad follow-up to the previous. This sounds like my favorite band just put out another album, and it's Dissection by Crimson Thorn.
What you have with Dissection is every band that puts out on Earth. There's only one band put out on Earth. And that was Crimson Thorn. But every band like this, that establishes a reputation for being, the most extreme or the heaviest or whatever. You're kind of caught between, do I want to continue writing songs that are super memorable like I did on the first record, or do I want to go for the throat and be heavier and more extreme? Like, do I want to up the ante so that I can still be the undisputed king, of heaviness? But I think with Dissection, they kind of did both, because this record is heavier than Unearthed. I don't know if it's heavy enough for me to like make a big statement about it, necessarily. I think it's like 12% heavier than Unearthed, right? Because you're still using a lot of the same tricks to achieve that level of extremity. But what I do like is the vocals are mixed differently. They're not quite as up front. I felt like the vocals were really loud on Unearthed, and I liked that, but I kind of like the air that's between like the microphone and my ears that's kind of going on here. I don't know how to describe it in production terms, but the vocals are kind of more in the music than they are on top of the music, if that makes sense. And instead of just the deep guttural vocals throughout the entire thing, I mean, don't get me wrong, it's mostly that. So if that's why you're here, then you won't be disappointed. But he does a little bit more like mid to high range growls and screams on this that I think sound really, really good. I think that the guitar tone is more brutal. There's a little bit more lead work on this record, like Joe mentioned. And the riffs are catchy. And it's interesting because I would say for most of the A side of this record, this band is still doing what they did before, only better. it isn't until you get to like track 6, I would say. I think that one's called All Authority, where all of a sudden you're hearing like cathedral keyboards and stuff. It's like, it's almost a little bit black metal, but it's not quite there. But somebody listened to an Emperor record, between these two. And you know what? That's as close to black metal as they get on this record. More about that later. But this one is interesting in that the first half of it just pummels you to death. But then you get about midway through the record, and this is kind of one of my favorite things. I love deep cuts in a record. And so they start kind of messing with the sound after you get through the first half. They start throwing some of those different elements in there. And I think it works really, really well. Like the song I Ask is like a 1 minute, 39 second song. It starts off, kind of like grind, kind of like black metal. It's like intentionally lo-fi. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. They had more fun overall, I think, with the writing of this record. And it doesn't take itself quite as musically seriously as Unearthed. And I'm kind of 50-50 on that. Some days I love that aspect of it because, like I said, I love the first half of Dissection a lot, and I appreciate the second half of it. But I'm not always in the mood to listen to the second half. Sometimes I just want more Unearthed. The version of this that I have, by the way, in the special edition, or not special edition, but the anthology edition. There's actually a cover of Anorexia Spiritual by Living Sacrifice on here, which is interesting hearing their it's kind of meta because, like I said, on Crimson Thorn's Plague demo, they were kind of more of a thrash metal band. But now they're like, the death metal monster machine Crimson Thorn. And then they're going to play one of Living Sacrifice's thrash songs. And so like they were thrash, and then they were death metal, and then they came back to being thrash for this cover. It's cool. It's interesting. It's almost like what Crimson Thorn would sound like if they had always stuck with thrash.
If you're going to stop playing heavy riffs for a few minutes and you want to play the black metal keyboards to keep everyone engaged, that's like lighting the fuse in the fire in the pit, because everybody knows where it's going to go. And I think most of the time, black metal's not that far from death metal. So it works. If you want to stick your toes in the water and give everyone that unexpected break that's not complete brutality, I think it works creatively. I think it works from a production standpoint. It definitely works from the album standpoint. Take a breath. Now we're heavy again. I don't think this album is the standout, but it fits right in with Unearthed, and I'm still enjoying it. So what else do you want from your death metal band this week, Dan?
Well, it's interesting because I feel like this one's a fan favorite. I know for a long time this was the harder one to get because I had a couple of copies of Unearthed, but Dissection was always kind of elusive until I finally found a dude online that had it, and I was like, just take my money. I don't care how much it costs. Just send me the records. But yeah, this one's harder to come by. I don't like it more than Unearthed, but I also think that could just be because Unearthed was kind of the classic. It was the first one that I heard. And like I said, I think the songs are just a little bit more memorable. I think that Unearthed has Dissection beat in the songwriting category a little bit more. And I don't care that maybe it sounds a little bit worse than Dissection. I mean, I listen to extreme metal. I don't really care that much how it sounds unless I like literally can't hear it. But yeah, I think it's a really, really, really good second album and just a hair behind the first. But we have to talk about the Striper cover because I'm of two minds about this cover. They covered Loud and Clear by Striper. Now, I'm not some massive Striper fan, as you'll find out when we do an episode on Striper eventually. I'm not like necessarily part of the club, more of a Christian death metal guy, less of a Christian hair metal guy. But this is a really, really, really good cover of a Striper song, but it's also so bananas as to why it's even here that I'm flabbergasted because, like, musically, they've got their I don't know, they're playing this song that was more or less recorded in standard by the original band, and they're playing it with the Crimson Thorn guitar tone and with Luke Reno's ultra guttural death vocals.
So fucking brutal.
But they pull it off. But other than that, other than the fact that it's obviously Crimson Thorn playing the song, they play it completely straight. Which is I don't know, it's weird. I don't know how to feel about it. I've listened to it so many times, and every time I listen to it, one time I'll listen and I'll be like, this is great. I love this. This is so cool. And then I'll listen to it again and I'll be like, why the hell is that on this record? There's no reason for this.
It's giving me flashbacks, man. A Plea for Purging's about to get on stage and play That's What You Get for a second time.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what to say. Like, it's an experience, but we can get off of it. I got stuck on that, and it's been hard. It's been really hard to digest that. And I knew that when we did this episode, I was gonna have to talk about it, and here we are. So my answer is that it is a cover that you absolutely should hear, but you are under no obligation to like it. And if you don't like it, you are under no obligation to tell me that you didn't like it.
2002, Purification.
So Purification is hands down the best sounding Crimson Thorn record.
It's got the right balance of heavy guitars. The drums are in the normal space for death metal, and there's just too much vocals.
Oh, way too much. But yeah, can you really have too much? You know, it's like telling me that I'm gonna eat, you know, because I'm on vacation, right? That I'm gonna eat too many cheeseburger pods when I'm at Disney. I mean, they're $12 each. They're $12 each, and I'm not rich, so you know, I'll eventually have to stop. But you know, you never know. I mean, unless you don't want me to stop, you know, patreon.com/discussmetal. We have some sweet perks. The $12 tier, make Dan eat cheeseburger pods till he explodes. Lack of Compassion, the opening track on Purification, is the catchiest Crimson Thorn song ever written. And it hits hard. It drops in, I mean, just like, it's just so, oh God, it is like, I'm like, holy crap. Like, this is it. This is the band fully realized. You know, this is so cool. And I always start off with something positive so that I can mix a little bit of turd talk into it afterwards. But I wish that the rest of the album sounded just like this song. And sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. We'll get into it. But I mean, just the way that they've got to have the closest thing this band can have to a chorus is just like, holier than thou, holier than thou, holier than thou, holier than thou. It's catchy. I don't know why it's catchy, but it's catchy.
You guys are setting me up for success when you open your record almost the same way Zayo opens up Self-Titled. It's like the song has the same formula as 5 Year Winter. Just give me a low, chromatic descending riff, brutality, and shredded vocals. This record definitely has the best sound overall, but it's gonna upset diehard fans in a few places. For me, I enjoyed all three of these albums because this is that dip in the water of death metal that's not mainstream. Does mainstream death metal even exist anymore?
Oh yeah, well, we'll get into it when we talk about a mainstream death metal band. You know, Lack of Compassion, 10 out of 10 stars. Would listen to that song on repeat. Have listened to that song on repeat. But then Humbled comes in, and Humbled is very representative of the type of record that we've got going on here. This is where the band is starting to, I would say they're abandoning death metal. It's definitely there. But with Withered, you start off with the keyboard, the organ sound again. And I didn't really think much of it because I was like, well, they did do that on the last record once. So, you know, stands to reason that they might do it again or try to do something with it. But then the tremolo picking kicks in and the vocals are higher pitched, and I'm like, okay, so they're doing a black metal thing on a song. Well, that's cool.
This is fine. It's going to be fine, guys.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you guys listen to black metal, I listen to black metal. I can see you're also a man of culture, you know, like that sort of thing. But I'm going to be honest with you, I don't know how good it sounds, really, combining these elements the way they're combined. Because what you have is a record that is mixed like a brutal death metal album, but you're not really playing brutal death metal all the time. So whenever they do these other things, it kind of sounds like a Crimson Thorn side project more than it sounds like Crimson Thorn, I guess, if there's any way to say that. And it's mean when there's only 3 records and they've only had 2 before this. I'm not against a band wanting to change up their sound. I just don't necessarily know if they're as good at playing this sort of mix of black and death metal as they are at just playing straight death metal. And, you know, they back off on it. You get to Sarcastic Deviation. I'm not going to go track by track. I'm doing that right now, but I'm not going to do the whole record that way. They go back on Sarcastic Deviation to, you know, sort of the unearthed dissection sound. So you're like, okay, so Humbled was just like a weird song. It's not bad. It's just weird. It's just different. And, you know, I don't know how many brutal death metal fans you know, but we don't really like things that are different. we like, you know, bands to just kind of do the same thing. You know, just keep doing that. And for the most part, they're doing good. You get Sarcastic Deviation, you get Withered. Those are like, again, really good death metal Crimson Thorn songs. And then you get to My Neighbor, and it comes in with like the keyboards and kind of a slower paced riff, kind of like a little bit of a doom thing. I think this song's really cool. I think if I had to be 100% honest, I think my biggest beef with this record is that I don't think the keyboards sound good. Like, in my opinion, this is just my opinion. This whole show is just my opinion. But I think the keyboards sound hokey. I don't think they blend with the death metal as seamlessly as like this sort of orchestrated black metal sound. Like you take a band like Ancestor, right? A band that was basically made to have keyboards. You know what I mean? So everything that they do kind of revolves around that. Whereas here, at worst, there's times where the keyboards sound just tacked on, and at best, it just sounds like they maybe could have picked something that sounded a little bit less storybook, I guess, because I feel like it clashes with the death metal, and maybe that's the point. You know, I mean, I know extreme music sometimes is designed specifically to make people uncomfortable, and this definitely makes me feel uncomfortable in a specific way that I don't like.
Don't think keyboards like Death Clock. Think keyboards like The Doors. Apply that logic to your listening experience. It's not what you're expecting, but it pushes the boundary a little bit. This band has a guitarist, a keyboardist who is doubling as the bass player, and it's one of the greatest bands of all time. So now take Crimson Thorn, a good death metal band. They're trying to dip their feet in the black metal. How do we break that stereotype? How do we do something creative and different? I got it, guys. We're not going to record death metal keyboards. We're going to play keyboards like The Doors. Nobody's going to see that coming. And you're right. It's weird. It throws me off. But it doesn't sound bad. If anything, it was a nice try. I'm glad one of the biggest bands in the history of the Christian metal scene tried it, instead of some mainstream death metal band that now gets criticized for that time they tried to sound like The Doors and ended up putting out the death metal Risk.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that they're betraying their sound. I just think that they're mixing their sound.
They tried a thing.
They did. You're right. I think maybe I'm being a little harsh. But then we need to also talk about the song Narrow, where the band like incorporates clean vocals into one of the songs. Do the clean vocals sound bad on their own? No, they do not. They're not out of key. Dude played it very safe. Didn't try to do anything crazy. But again, like the keyboards, I just don't feel like it fits. And this is a really nice way of saying, get your clean vocals out of my brutal death metal record. You know, we don't need that around these parts. But again, what I see really with this is that these guys started really getting into like bands like Ancestor and some of the more Scandinavian, you know, metal bands from that scene. And I think they just wanted to branch out and cover more aspects of extreme metal. And unfortunately, with this being the final album that they released, at least so far, I don't know. It's been 20 years, so you take that how you will. Maybe they'll do something at some point. I did see the band live at Cornerstone, and I believe it was 2006 or 2007, and they put on an incredible show. I loved it. And they said that they were working on a new album at the time, and that they were working on a side project that was going to be more black metal keyboard based, which makes me wonder if maybe they had figured it out at that point. Like, we're gonna do this side thing on the side, and we're gonna keep doing what we do, as the main thing. Let's kind of compartmentalize it a little bit. But I think they tried a thing. I don't think it necessarily worked 100%, but again, there are a lot of people out here that this is their favorite Crimson Thorn album, and I can see why, because on one hand, it is the most diversity on any of their albums. You're not just settled in for one experience. So I think that aspect of it is cool. It's just that the different stuff that they tried was not for me. And this is different than me saying like, oh, this is a bad record, avoid 1 out of 10 stars, do not recommend, like that sort of thing. It's more just that I know people whose preference is stuff like what's on this record. It's just not my preference. I don't think anything they do badly. It just doesn't catch me too well. So this is the one I don't really listen to too much. I'll just listen to Unearthed. I listen to Unearthed mostly, and sometimes Dissection if I want to continue getting beat over the head with the tire iron.
Final thoughts on Crimson Thorn, Dan?
Well, I mean, Crimson Thorn is a band that I think you need to experience at least once. And maybe for you it's the novelty of a brutal Christian death metal band. I mean, we're enough years in the future now where that shouldn't be a novelty anymore. But I think at the time, I think they paved the way for a lot of bands that would become more popular. And I really enjoyed the brutality. I enjoyed the riffs. I enjoyed the growls. I think overall these guys were really, really, really fun revisit for me personally. And I would recommend picking up the Anthology of Brutality. You get everything. You get the Plague demo, you get Unearthed, you get Dissection, and you get Purification all in one package. So you decide. Send us an email or leave us some comments. Let us know how you felt about these records.
Crimson Thorn is a good death metal band. A lot of focus in the Christian metal scene is what band does this sound like? At least that's the way it used to be. Crimson Thorn was just a good band. If you take the evangelical piece away from it and just listen to the music, what you're going to get is 2.5 albums of straight brutality with enough dirge and enough death metal, all the throat-shredding vocals and blast beats that you could possibly want in a good death metal band. Yeah, they tried a thing right at the end of the discography. It's still a good 3-album experience. There is a journey here, and like Dan always says, you can go back to the first album if that's what you're looking for. I think everyone should check out Crimson Thorn. You're going to have a good time, unless you just can't let go of the Christian metal thing. Dan, what's your album of the week?
My album of the week, well, this one was really hard to pick, but I'm going to have to just go with it. It's going to have to be Oh, What the Future Holds by Fit for an Autopsy. So good. Will Putney does it again, as he always does. I mean, we talked about it, Fit for an Autopsy. I mean, there was nothing that I don't think we had anything bad to say other than like, please stop beating us in the face so hard we can barely take it.
The King of Metal strikes again. My album of the week is Distant, Aeons of Oblivion. So heavy, so brutal.
It's like serious bro job.
Take us out, DFT.
Thank you guys so much for listening to Discography Discussion. If you want to follow the podcast on social media, you can follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/discography discussion. You can follow us on Twitter at discussmetal and on Instagram at discussmetal. You can send us an email at danandjoeshow@gmail.com, or you could join our Discord server. We've got a link in the show notes that'll take you to our Discord server. We hope to see you there, and we want to see how good your meme game is. If you would like to sponsor an episode of Discography Discussion, send us an email again at danandjoeshow@gmail.com. Let us know what your band is, or what your company is, or what you're selling, and we'll see if we can work something out for you.
And on that note, this has been episode 259 of Discography Discussion. Thank you for listening. You can like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter at discussmetal. Subscribe to our podcast everywhere you listen to podcasts, including Google Play, Apple Podcasts, and Stitcher. Visit discussmetal.com for all things discography discussion. And please send questions and comments to danandjoeshow@gmail.com. If you are not a patron, you can become one at patreon.com/discussmetal. We have some sweet perks.
Scrooge McDuckin through your money!
$1 a month gets you into that exclusive album review feed. Slightly more than that gets you a shout out on the show. And slightly more than that, you get to be part of the monthly hangout. Hope to see you there.
No fear, the truth walks by our side. I'm sure these cruises you find.